Nobody loses their faith in a single sentence. It happens one conversation at a time, the kind so ordinary you'd never think to write it down. Not the arguments, not the sermons that challenged you, the small talk, the venting, the conversations you've had so many times you stopped noticing what they were actually doing to you. 5 conversations today. None of them will sound dangerous while you're having them. That's exactly why they work. 1. The conversation where you vent about church until venting becomes what you actually believe. It started small. A leadership decision that bothered you. A sermon that missed the mark. You brought it up to a friend over coffee, and it felt good to say out loud. Someone finally understood how frustrated you'd been. So you brought it up again and again. Every time something new happened, you had somewhere to put it, and someone who'd nod along. And somewhere in month 6 or 7 of that same conversation, you noticed you weren't just venting anymore. You were rehearsing a case against the whole thing. Complaints repeated enough times stop being complaints. They become the story you tell yourself about what church actually is. And eventually, you start believing your own script more than you believe what you first walked in loving. Venting was never supposed to be where your faith gets its opinions from. 2. The conversation where someone helps you talk yourself out of your own conscience. You knew something was off, a relationship, a habit, a decision you'd already made before you asked anyone's opinion. But you brought it to the one friend who'd tell you what you wanted to hear, instead of the one who'd actually ask you the hard question. And they didn't have to lie to you. They just had to say, I mean, it's not that big a deal, enough times, in enough different conversations, until the conviction you walked in with quietly went numb. A conscience doesn't usually get destroyed in one conversation. It gets talked down, gently, by people who love you enough to want you comfortable, but aren't willing to love you enough to tell you the hard truth. If you've been collecting friends who always agree with the version of you that wants an exception, that's not community. That's an audience for your rationalizing. I've been on both sides of that conversation, the one asking and the one who should have said something and didn't. Stay with me. The next one is quieter than either of these. 3. The conversation where someone else's mess becomes your comfort. You hear about a friend's marriage falling apart, or someone's very public failure, and in the conversation that follows, something in you settles a little. Not because you're glad for their pain, because their collapse quietly proves you're doing better than you feel like you're doing. So the conversation keeps happening, different names, same relief. And you never notice that your peace has quietly started depending on someone else's worst story instead of on anything actually true about your own walk with God. A peace that needs someone else's collapse to feel steady was never peace at all. It was comparison, borrowing peace's name because it didn't want to be examined too closely. If the conversation that calms you down the fastest is one about someone else's failure, that should worry you more than it comforts you. 4. The conversation you keep having with everyone except God. You've talked to your spouse about it, your therapist, your group chat, your best friend at midnight 3 times this month. All real conversations, all genuinely helpful. But somewhere in talking to everyone, you noticed you'd quietly stopped bringing it to him directly. Talking through your pain with people was never meant to replace bringing it to him. It was meant to walk alongside that, not stand in for it. If you can recount the whole story to 4 different people this week and haven't once said any of it out loud to God, the conversation that actually needed to happen didn't. If 2 or 3 of these have already named something in you, don't rush past that feeling. Let it sit for a second before the next one. 5. The conversation where you say, I'm fine, and something in you goes a little more hollow every time you say it. Someone at church asks how you're doing. I'm good, honestly, just Izzy. A small lie said so often it barely registers as one anymore. Meanwhile, the actual answer, exhausted, doubting, quietly falling apart on the inside, never gets spoken out loud to a single person. And here's what almost nobody tells you about that conversation. Every time you perform fine instead of telling the truth, it gets a little easier to believe your own performance and a little harder to remember what honest actually sounds like. A faith that has to look fine in every conversation eventually starts mistaking the performance for the real thing. And the version of you performing fine is usually the loneliest person in the room. If nobody in your life has heard the true answer to "how are you" in longer than you can remember, that silence is its own kind of conversation, and it's the one slowly costing you the most. Here's what all 5 have in common: venting that became belief, rationalizing that numbed a conscience, comparison that borrowed someone else's collapse for peace, processing everyone except him, performing fine instead of telling the truth. None of these are dramatic moments of rebellion. They're just ordinary conversations, repeated enough times, quietly rerouting what you actually believe. And here's the hope in that. If a conversation slowly wore something down in you, a different conversation can slowly build it back. The same repetition that hurt you is available to heal you. It's not too late to change what you keep saying and who you keep saying it to. So sit with this honestly. Which conversation have you been having on repeat without ever noticing what it was quietly teaching you to believe? And what would it look like to finally have the one conversation you've been avoiding? The one with him. Your faith isn't just shaped by the sermons you sit through. It's shaped by every ordinary conversation you keep having, whether you're paying attention to it or not. Lord, show me the conversations that have been quietly rewriting what I believe. Show me who I've been talking to instead of you. Teach me to bring the true answer to you before I hand out the easy one to everyone else. I don't want to keep performing fine. I want to actually be near you. Faith isn't only lost in a crisis of doubt. Sometimes it's just talked away, one ordinary conversation at a time. And it can be talked back the same way. Which of the 5 have you been having? You don't have to say which one, just notice it. And send this to someone who might need permission to finally tell the truth about how they're doing. Subscribe to Guard Your Spirit. Next time, we're looking at 6 times the Bible uses the word love and why they were never meant to mean the same thing.